Let me ask you something. When was the last time you chased something? A person, a promotion, an approval, a yes from someone who kept giving you maybes and actually stopped to ask yourself, what am I really chasing here? Because here's the truth, most people never sit with the chase was never really about them. It was never really about the job, the relationship, the person on the other end of that unanswered text. The chase was about you. It was about a hole inside you that you were hoping someone else would fill. So you wouldn't have to look at it yourself. Think about it. When you're running after someone's attention, someone's love, someone's validation, what's actually happening in that moment, you're outsourcing your sense of worth. You're saying, if I can just get this person to want me, to choose me, to stay, then I'll know I'm enough. But that's a rigged game, because the moment they say yes, the hole doesn't close. It just goes quiet for a minute. And then it opens right back up and you're off chasing the next thing that might finally make you feel whole. This is the part nobody wants to hear. The chase is a distraction technique. It's brilliant, actually, in a tragic kind of way. Because as long as you're moving, as long as you're pursuing, proving, performing, you never have to sit still long enough to face the real question, which is, who am I when nobody's chasing me back? That's terrifying for most people. Genuinely terrifying. Because our culture has taught us that stillness is failure. That if you're not pursuing something, a person, a goal, a version of success someone else defined for you, then you're falling behind, you're settling, you're less than. So we keep running, we keep chasing, not because we're pursuing love or opportunity, we're outrunning silence, we're outrunning ourselves. And here's where it gets even more interesting psychologically. The people we chase hardest are usually the ones who give us the least. Why? Because unpredictability hijacks the brain. It's the same mechanism as a slot machine. When something is inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes there, sometimes gone, your nervous system doesn't relax. It locks in. It becomes obsessed with solving the puzzle, closing the loop, finally earning the consistency it never got. That's not romance. That's not passion. That's a trauma response dressed up in the language of desire. So when I say the chase was never about them, I mean it. It was about an old wound looking for a new bandage. It was about a younger version of you, somewhere back in your story, who learned that love has to be earned, that worth has to be proven, that if you just try hard enough, work enough, chase enough, you'll finally be chosen. But here's the shift. The moment you understand this, really understand it, not just intellectually, but in your bones, everything changes. Because you stop asking, how do I get them to want me? And you start asking the only question that ever actually mattered, do I want me? That question is where your power lives, not in the chase, not in their response, in you. And when you finally stop running long enough to ask it, that's not the end of the story. That's where the real one begins. So you stop chasing. And then what happens? Silence. That's what happens. The phone doesn't buzz, the follow-up doesn't come. The person who once filled your thoughts now just isn't there. And in that silence, most people make a critical error. They interpret it as punishment. They think they're punishing me for pulling back. They're punishing me for finally having boundaries. This silence is a verdict, and the verdict is, I wasn't enough. I want you to hear me on this, because it's the hinge point of everything we're talking about today. That silence is not a punishment being handed to you. It's not a sentence, it's a mirror. And what it's reflecting back isn't their judgment of you, it's information you were never able to see clearly before, because you were too busy generating noise to hear it. Think about what chasing actually does to your perception. When you're constantly reaching, constantly initiating, constantly filling the space between you and another person with your own effort, you never get an accurate reading of where you actually stand. You're like someone shouting in a room, then wondering why they can't hear an echo. Of course you can't. You're the only sound in the room. But the second you stop, the second you go quiet, You finally get to hear what was there all along. And sometimes what you hear is nothing, and that nothing is not them punishing you. That nothing is the answer. It was always the answer. You just couldn't hear it over the sound of your own chasing. This is where I need you to make a distinction because it's psychologically crucial. There's a difference between rejection and clarity. Rejection is a story you tell yourself about your worth. Clarity is simply data about reality. The silence doesn't say you're not enough. The silence says this is not aligned. Those are two completely different sentences, and only one of them is true. Here's the deeper philosophical point. For most of your life, you've probably measured your value by response. Somebody replies, you matter. Somebody shows up, you matter. Somebody chases you back, you matter. But that means your sense of worth has been living outside of you this entire time, rented out to other people's timelines, other people's moods, other people's capacity to show up. And silence terrifies you, not because of what it says about them. It terrifies you because of what you've decided it says about you. But what if it doesn't say anything about you at all? What if silence is simply the absence of alignment? Nothing more, nothing less. What if it's not a punishment, but a permission slip? Permission to stop performing for people who are never going to meet you where you stood. Permission to finally see the relationship, the job, the dynamic, exactly as it was, instead of as you were willing it to be through sheer force of pursuit. This is the moment clarity arrives, not when they respond, when they don't. Because in that stillness, you finally see the shape of things without your own hands trying to reshape them. So the next time silence shows up in your life, after you've stopped chasing, after you've stopped proving, after you've stopped performing, don't ask, what did I do wrong? Ask instead, what is this finally letting me see? Because silence was never the punishment. Silence was the truth waiting for you to stop talking long enough to hear it. Now here's where I want to get into the machinery of the mind, because what happens next is not weakness. It's not a character flaw, it's biology. And once you see it clearly, you can never unsee it. You stop chasing. Silence shows up. And instead of feeling relief, instead of feeling clarity, something inside you screams to chase harder. You feel the pull to send one more message, make one more call, show up one more time, just to check. And I want you to understand that pull is not love. That pull is not devotion. That pull is a trained reflex. And it has a name in psychology, intermittent reinforcement. Let me break this down because it's one of the most powerful mechanisms in the human brain. If you give someone a reward every single time they do something, the brain learns the pattern, and eventually it stops being exciting, it becomes predictable. But if you give a reward sometimes unpredictably, inconsistently, just often enough to keep hope alive, the brain doesn't relax. It obsesses. This is the exact mechanism behind slot machines. It's the exact mechanism behind addiction. And it is, whether we like admitting it or not, the exact mechanism behind why we chase people who only show up some of the time. Think about the dynamic. If someone ignored you completely, consistently, with total predictability, you'd walk away. It would hurt, but it would be clean. The problem is never the people who are consistently absent. The problem is the ones who are just present enough, a reply here, a moment of warmth there, just enough contact to keep the loop open, just enough silence to make you chase. Your brain in that moment is not thinking about them. Your brain is trying to solve a puzzle. It's trying to close an open loop. Humans are wired for completion. The Zeigarnik effect, psychologists call it. Unfinished stories haunt us more than finished ones. An unanswered question occupies more mental space than an answered one. So when someone goes quiet, your mind doesn't file it away. It keeps the tab open. It keeps circling back, trying to resolve what was left incomplete. This is why stopping the chase feels almost physically unbearable at first. It's not romantic longing, it's withdrawal. It is your nervous system reacting the way it would to any interrupted pattern of reward. Restless, agitated, hyper-focused on the one thing it can't have. And here is the deeper truth beneath all of it. This reflex didn't start with them. It started long before them, maybe in childhood, maybe in an earlier relationship, maybe in a pattern you've repeated so many times you mistook it for who you are. Somewhere along the way, you learned that love, attention, approval, they come inconsistently, and inconsistency became familiar. And familiar to the nervous system feels like home, even when home was never safe. So when you feel that urge to chase harder in the silence, I need you to do something radical. I need you to pause and name it out loud. This is not love, this is a loop. Because the moment you name the mechanism, you take back the power the mechanism had over you. You stop being a passenger in your own psychology and you become the one driving. You are not weak for feeling the pull. You are human, wired by biology older than your heartbreak. But you are not required to obey every wire in your brain. The loop only wins if you stay silent about the fact that it exists. Name it and you break it. Let's be honest with each other for a moment, because I don't want to stand up here and sell you a fantasy. I don't want to tell you that the moment you stop chasing, you float off into some blissful, enlightened peace, untouched by pain. That's not real. And if someone tells you healing feels good the whole way through, they're not talking about healing, they're talking about marketing. Here's the truth. Stopping the chase costs you something. It costs you in the short term and it costs you before it ever gives anything back. So let's name the price, because naming it is what allows you to pay it without resentment. First, it costs you the identity you built around pursuing. If you've spent months, years, maybe most of your life being the one who tries harder, the one who shows up, the one who never gives up on people, then stopping doesn't just change your behavior. It threatens your identity. Some part of you starts whispering, if I'm not chasing, who am I? That whisper is not weakness. That's a self-concept in withdrawal. And withdrawal is never comfortable, whether you're detoxing from a substance or detoxing from a role you've played your whole life. Second, it costs you the illusion of control. As long as you were chasing, you had something to do. You had a plan, a next move, a message to send, a way to influence the outcome. The moment you stop, you lose that. You're left standing in the open field of not knowing if they'll come back, not knowing if you made the right choice, not knowing what happens next. And I promise you, the human mind will take painful certainty over peaceful uncertainty almost every single time. That's not because you're broken. That's because uncertainty to a primitive nervous system has always signaled danger. Third, and this is the one nobody talks about enough, it cost you the fantasy. Because as long as you were chasing, you got to keep believing in the version of them or the version of the outcome that you were chasing toward. The moment you stop, you have to look at what's actually there instead of what you were hoping would eventually appear if you just tried a little harder. That's grief. Real grief, not for what was lost, but for what was never actually real to begin with. So in these early days of stopping, and I mean days, sometimes weeks, you will likely feel worse before you feel better. You'll feel the ache of unanswered effort sitting in your chest like unfinished business. You'll feel the urge to check your phone. You'll feel the pull to explain yourself, to soften the silence, to make sure they know you still care. All of that is normal. None of it means you're doing this wrong. I need you to hear this clearly. Discomfort is not evidence of failure. Discomfort is evidence of change. If it didn't hurt, it wouldn't mean anything. If withdrawal from an old pattern felt easy, it wouldn't be a pattern worth breaking. It would just be a preference you were casually adjusting. So don't mistake the ache for a sign to go back. Don't mistake the silence in your own chest for proof that you made a mistake. This is the cost of walking out of a loop that was never going to resolve itself. Because here's what's coming next. Once you're willing to pay this price, on the other side of this discomfort is an emptiness, it's space. And what you build in that space is going to be worth every uncomfortable hour it took to clear it. Now let's talk about what's on the other side. Because everything I just described, the withdrawal, the ache, the identity crisis of no longer being the one who chases, that's real. But it's not the destination, it's the toll booth. And most people turn around right there at the toll booth because they mistake the cost of the road for the road itself. But if you keep going, if you're willing to sit in that discomfort without reaching backward to undo it, something remarkable starts to happen. The very thing that felt like punishment starts to reveal itself as one of the greatest returns you will ever collect. Let's start with time. Do you understand how much of your life gets quietly consumed by chasing? Not just the messages you send or the plans you make. I'm talking about the mental real estate, the replaying of conversations, the rehearsing of what to say next, the checking, the waiting, the analyzing of tone in a 3-word text. That's not a few minutes a day for most people, that's hours. That's energy that could have built something, healed something, created something. Instead, it was spent trying to solve a puzzle that was never yours to solve, alone. When you stop chasing, you don't just get quiet, you get your life back hour by hour. Then there's energy. And I don't just mean time, I mean the actual currency of your nervous system. Chasing keeps you in a low-grade state of alert, hypervigilant, waiting. Your body doesn't know the difference between waiting for a text back and waiting for danger to pass. The biology of anticipation is remarkably similar. So when you stop chasing, your nervous system finally gets to exhale. And that exhale is not passive. That exhale is where your creativity comes back, where your appetite comes back, where you start sleeping through the night again, because your body is no longer keeping watch for a person who was never going to relieve it of duty. But here's the return that matters most, the one underneath all the others, self-respect. Every time you chase someone who isn't chasing you back, you're, in a very real sense, teaching yourself that your boundaries are negotiable, that your peace is worth less than their potential presence. And every single time you stop and you hold that stop, you teach yourself something different. You teach yourself that you are a person whose word to yourself actually means something. That's not a small thing, that might be the biggest thing. Because self-respect isn't built in the big dramatic moments. It's built in the quiet, unglamorous decision not to send the text, not to check, not to reach again and again. Until it becomes who you are instead of something you're forcing yourself to do. And then almost without noticing, clarity arrives. Not the clarity of silence as mirror that we talked about earlier, a deeper clarity now. Clarity about what you actually want, what you actually deserve, what patterns you're no longer willing to live inside of. This is the moment the punishment reveals its disguise. It was never punishment, it was renovation. It was the tearing down of a structure that was never going to hold the life you actually wanted to build. So if you're standing at that toll booth right now, aching, uncertain, wondering if the silence means something is wrong with you, I want you to remember this. What feels like loss right now is actually inventory. Time, energy, self-respect, clarity, they're not gone. They were just tied up in something that was never going to give them back. Stop chasing and watch what returns to you instead. So let's bring this all the way home. Because everything we've talked about today, the chasing, the silence, the withdrawal, the reflex, the cost, the return, all of it has been pointing toward one relationship. And it's not the one you think you came into this room maybe thinking this was a talk about them. about the person who went quiet, about the job that didn't call back, about whoever it was that taught you how to run after something that kept moving away from you. But if you've been listening, really listening, you already know the truth. This was never about them. This was about the relationship you abandoned in order to chase everyone else's approval. In the first place, the relationship with yourself. Think about it honestly. How much of your life have you spent building a case for your worth to people who were never going to be the judge and jury of it? How many hours, how much energy, how much of your own voice have you handed over to someone else's? Response as if their yes or no held more authority over your value than you do. That's not devotion, that's abdication. You are outsourcing the one job that was always, only ever yours. Here's what I need you to understand. At the deepest level, before you leave this room today, the silence that once felt like punishment, the ex who didn't call, the friend who drifted, the opportunity that didn't pan out, that silence did something for you that no amount of chasing ever could. It forced you back into a room you'd been avoiding, a room with just you in it. No performance, no proving, no audience to convince. Just you and the question you'd been outrunning your whole life. Do I actually like who I am when no one's watching me try? That question is not comfortable, but it is the only question that leads somewhere real. Because a relationship built on being chosen by others will always be as fragile as their mood, their availability, their capacity to show up. But a relationship built on being chosen by yourself, that doesn't waver with someone else's, silence. It doesn't need a reply to hold its shape. It stands on its own foundation in any weather, with or without an audience. This is the real transformation underneath everything we've covered today. Not learning how to get people to stay, not learning how to master the art of not caring, but learning how to turn all of that pursuit, all of that energy, all of that devotion you were pouring into everyone else, and finally pointing it inward, chasing your own growth, chasing your own peace, chasing the version of you that doesn't flinch in silence because you're no longer waiting for someone else's noise to tell you that you matter. So here's what I want you to walk out of this room with. The next time silence shows up in your life, and it will, because silence always returns to teach you something. Don't ask what's wrong with you. Ask what it's finally giving you the space to build. Because the punishment was never the silence. The punishment was believing you needed someone else's voice to hear your own. Stop chasing them. Start meeting yourself. That's not the end of the story. That's the first time you've ever really begun it. Let me bring this full circle because everything I've shared with you today was never 6 separate ideas. It was one truth viewed from 6 different angles. We started by asking what you were really chasing, and we discovered it was never them. It was a hole inside you looking for someone else to fill it. Then silence showed up, and instead of hearing it as rejection, you learned to hear it as information. A mirror finally free of the noise you'd been generating. We named the reflex that made you want to chase harder in that silence. The loop, the unfinished story your nervous system couldn't let go of. And in naming it, you took its power back. We told the truth about the cost, the identity you'd have to grieve, the certainty you'd have to release, the fantasy you'd have to let die. And then we watched what came back to replace it, the time, the energy, the self-respect. The clarity that chasing had quietly been draining from you all along. And finally, we arrived at the only relationship any of this was ever really about, not theirs, yours. So here's what I want you to carry out of this room. The silence you've been afraid of was never a punishment. It was a teacher standing quietly at the door, waiting for you to stop running long enough to let it in. Every person who went quiet, every opportunity that didn't circle back, every door that closed without explanation, none of it was proof that you weren't enough. It was space clearing itself so you could finally hear the one voice you'd spent your whole life drowning out your own. I'm not going to stand here and tell you this is easy. I told you already it costs something. It costs the version of you that only felt safe when you were useful, when you were pursuing, when you were earning your place in someone else's story. But on the other side of that cost is a version of you that doesn't flinch when the room goes quiet. A version of you that doesn't need a reply to know your own worth. A version of you that stops mistaking movement for meaning. And finally sits still long enough to build something real. So here's my question for you. The one to take home tonight, into tomorrow, into every silence that shows up in your life from here forward. What would you build? Who would you become? If you stopped spending your life chasing everyone else's voice and started listening for your own, the chase is over, not because you gave up, because you finally realized what you were running toward was never out there. It was you. It was always you. Go home, stop chasing, start arriving.